Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and today on my channel about Norse language myth and related subjects, I want to talk a little bit about a Patreon requested topic, which is visual and artistic symbols in Old Norse. Although, really, this is another one of those videos where I'm kind of talking about the absence of information. Now, right off the top, I'm going to ask you to forgive me. I'm pretty close to where the airplanes fly, so you may hear an airplane, even though I think my microphone is working this time. So, the problem is with this question about visual and artistic symbols that, yes, there are visual and artistic symbols on, for example, rune stones, picture stones, and other memorials of the Viking Age. But there is nothing in the Viking Age that explains them, right? I think today we are so used to a very self-conscious culture where you can find explanations for just about anything, and where people try to read into just about anything because they get bored and try to make everything about, you know, establishing or deflecting one identity or another. But in a pre-modern age where people are a lot more concerned with survival, yes, they have symbolic expression, but no, they don't necessarily take the time to express it. I mean, for one thing, for a lot of the Viking Age, maybe a certain amount of people, maybe even a fairly large amount of people were literate in runes, but you notice that runes are never really used for literature, right? As far as we know, you just don't find poems and sagas actually written in runes. Probably the closest thing to that is the Ruk runestone, which does have a pretty cryptic, pretty long inscription that has some literary characteristics, including some poetry. But between that and the Codex Runicus from the 1300s, which just contains a Danish law code and one little bit from one little ditty, one little song, most runic writing concerns basically so-and-so died, or I made this bridge, or this is my sword. Pretty everyday things like that. So if some kind of a symbol appears in this pre-literary world, well, pre-written literary world, I mean, obviously they had oral literature and poetry, there's not necessarily anything to explain it. So when you see a visual symbol that legitimately dates from the Viking Age, like what today is often called the Valknútr, which would mean the knot of the dead man on the battlefield, the knot of the slain is one way of putting that. Well, let's look at this for a moment. Yes, this does date from the Viking Age. We do find this on Viking Age memorials. For example, we see it on the Sturhammerswan picture stone, where it appears between a man being speared or maybe thrust with a spear into a burial mound and a large bird, which for many has suggested that it might be associated with Odin, who's associated with large birds like eagles and ravens, and with the spear, and including perhaps even sacrifice with the spear based on stuff like his self-sacrifice in Havamal or the sacrifice to him in Gathrek saga. But we don't even know what the name of this symbol was in the Viking Age. Valknútr is a modern coinage in Old Norse, but it's still a modern coinage for the name. It's possible this is the same symbol that Snorri in Skaldskaparmal, part of the prose edda that not many people read, calls the Hrungnishjarta, the heart of Hrungnir. He says there, Hrungnir otti hjarta það frakt af hörðum steini og tindótt með þremar hornum, svo sem síðan gert ristubrag það Hrungnishjarta heitir. Hrungnir had a heart which is famous, of hard stone, and pointy with 3 horns or corners, as is later made a carved design that is called the Hrungnishjarta. It certainly could be this this set of 3 triangles, But he doesn't necessarily say that, and we don't have Snorri here to draw us out what symbol he's thinking about. He also doesn't say, and it means X. He just calls it a carved design, Ristubrak. And we find it in all kinds of places. The Oseberg burial, or items from the Oseberg burial in Norway, contain the symbol. So does a ring, the Nan River ring from England from the 700s or 800s. That's from Cambridgeshire, which is in the Danelaw, but the ring could even be early enough that it's actually Old English. And we just can't say what this means, right? I mean, it's just like today. I like all kinds of things that have designs on them, right? I like kind of Aztec designs, right? Sort of geometric patterns that are often associated with the Southwest. I wear shirts and rings and stuff with those things, but if you ask me what they mean, maybe it does mean some particular thing to somebody, but I don't know what those things are. I just kind of like how they look. Or consider the way that sort of arbitrary symbols can actually become kind of arbitrarily symbolic of a particular group or position. I mean, think about the Democratic donkey and the Republican elephant. What about donkeys suggest to you the platform of the Democratic Party? What about elephants suggest to you the platform of the Republican Party? It's fundamentally arbitrary. It has a history behind it, but there's nothing that somebody from outside the culture and outside the context of what's written in our culture or expressed orally in our culture could look at an elephant or a donkey and say, oh yeah, this makes sense, right? And this Ristubrak, the carved design, that people today have started to call Valknútr, is one of those things. Yes, it could be associated with Odin. That's possible, but it's impossible to say for sure, and we need to be comfortable with that uncertainty. I would also draw your attention to the fact that these sets of three arranged in a similar way are maybe a broader common symbol in the Viking Age. We see three horns arranged in a very similar way on the Snowbringer stone, which is from the early 800s from Denmark. This is a somewhat common style of memorial stone. We've got a runic inscription in the Younger Futhark, of course, a fairly early form of the Younger Futhark, that says, Gunvald Stein sonar Roalds Thular o Salhaugum. It just means the stone of Gunvald, the son of Hroald, who was the Thular at Salhaugar. Thular is a very mysterious word in Old Norse, used of apparently some kind of order who might have something to do with runes or poetry. Odin uses it of himself and Hofmal. It's a mysterious word in of itself. But here we've got this three-horn symbol which reminds me pretty profoundly actually of the symbol called the Valknútr, has its three elements arranged together in a similar way. And maybe it's just that kind of Triskel design that is itself visually appealing to people in the Viking Age in the same way that like the Aztec type design might be appealing to me. So essentially what I'm telling you, and this will always disappoint people, is, it's interesting and useful to acknowledge what visual symbols actually originate in the Viking Age, but it's useless for an understanding of their history and beliefs and lore to pretend that we know what it was, or what it meant, or what it was even called. You can construct what you want around it, I guess, for your modern uses, but be aware that that's what's being done, that it's being constructed. Nowhere in the process of getting a PhD in Scandinavian studies did any of my professors impart to me any psychic powers, and they haven't suddenly manifested in me any later in the process of teaching or researching this stuff. And nobody else has those psychic powers either. So just be aware that we're kind of in the dark here. Now in a moment I'm going to talk about a couple other potential visual symbols of the Viking Age that at least are associated with it by people today. Now, one visual symbol from the Viking Age that I wouldn't discount the importance of is the Thor's hammer. Obviously, this had some symbolic meaning to people at the time because we find hundreds of these in amulets, often buried with people. Now, this could have arisen as a response to the crucifix worn by Christians. That's possible. It could also have been something motivated from within the culture. Hard to say, but it's difficult to deny that that has some kind of symbolic meaning. It's also interesting to note that many of these actually have bird or other animal heads. For example, there's the bird in the famous Skåne hammer, and the wolf in the Icelandic hammer, if that's what it is. It could also be a cross, or it could be intended to be both. So maybe those animals have some kind of symbolic association too. I mean, obviously we see that animals have a great importance in Norse mythology, especially wolves, ravens, horses, and snakes, and eagles, and horses. Did I say horses? But one kind of symbol that I think is over-associated with the Viking Age, especially in trying to draw deeper meanings out of it, are the so-called galdrastafir, or magical staves, which originate from early modern or at oldest late medieval manuscripts. Now, I have a whole video about the most famous of these, the Ægishjálmur, which I'll link to a video in the top right if you're on YouTube in 2020 or thereabouts. You can look at that. But there's many others, such as the Vegvisir, which is kind of similar looking. It's kind of like Ægishjálmur, but not as symmetrical. And in the manuscript, the Huld manuscript on page 26V, we see this symbol, and we see the description, Berri maður stafi þessa á sér, vitlis maður ekki í hríðum, né vondu vetri þó ókunnugur sé. And if you're one of the 10 people who pays attention to my pronunciation for a reason other than calling me names about it, you'll notice that the very way this is spelled leads me to pronounce it more like modern Icelandic, because it's very close to modern Icelandic. This is early modern. And it just says, if a man carries these symbols on himself, he will not get lost in storms nor bad weather, even though he is in an unfamiliar place, is more or less the just this. Now, there's a lot of other less well-known magical staves than that in other manuscripts as well, though there is no evidence that any of them go back to pre-Christian times. In fact, these symbols are not really that different, as I pointed out in my video about Ægishjálmur, to magical staves that are in all kinds of other texts from all around the Christian European world. There's no real reason to say that these have, to speculate that these have some kind of pre-Christian Norse origin, and there's especially no reason to speculate about their meaning in a pre-Christian Norse society where we don't even see them used. Yes, they could have been, but we don't know they were. I also need to point out that runes, and bind runes are no different, don't have meanings in themselves of a symbolic kind that we can confidently date back to the Viking Age or pre-Christian times. Yes, modern readers and occult writers, and when I say modern, I'm going all the way back to early modern times, 1600s, 1700s, do speculate about and write about, and often a lot of ink and a lot of blog space have been spilled about the symbolic meanings. You know, you carve this rune and you're evoking this power. You carve these two runes together and their combined powers and this bind rune or this or that. But from the Viking Age, from the actual pre-Christian period when the Elder Futhark and later the Younger Futhark were used in Scandinavia, we know only that these were used as letters and an alphabet, not as symbols. Yes, there are some inscriptions that we don't necessarily know the meaning of that don't seem to have alphabetic meaning. But can we jump to the conclusion that that's supposed to mean what somebody in the 20th century arbitrarily speculates is the magical meaning of that rune? I'm skeptical. I think we need to maintain an attitude that clearly, distinctly separates what we know from what is built as an edifice in modern times on top of what we actually know, and to resist the temptation to over-explain from our imaginations when the facts will probably just never be known to us. All right, well, with a raven loudly echoing in the mountains around me, I'm going to conclude this video, probably having thoroughly disappointed the people who wanted this topic. But this is the thing. I'm never going to knowingly, willingly step off of the cliff of fact and into the fantasy lands of speculation. Not my own and not anybody else's. So for now, for beautiful Colorado, let me wish you good times, good skepticism, and all the best.